Welcome to the CSR Universe Leaders Talk segment. And today, in our special episode, we are going to discuss and deliberate an important topic of climate change and the possible solutions to mitigate this change. And as we all know that the entire world is coming together on global platforms to discuss the problems and solutions at hand, and also trying to reach out at cooperative approaches to mitigate climate crisis. And one of those mechanisms is the new and emerging and evolving carbon markets. And with the passage of the Energy Conservation Bill, now it will give impetus and drive to India's efforts to establish carbon markets and hence transition into a renewable energy economy and meet its climate commitments, especially that of net zero. And as we all know that India right now is one of the top five emitters in the world. And this is majorly because of the electricity generation, which is heavily reliant on coal-based power plants in the country. And around 74% of India's electricity generation comes from coal. So it makes it the source of 1/3 of the country's total greenhouse gas emissions. And carbon markets across the world is coming up as a major solution to this problem. So now, what role is this carbon market economy going to play in India? To dwell further onto the subject of carbon markets and how carbon markets can solve the current climate crisis. And we at the CSR Universe are truly privileged and grateful to have with us our esteemed guest for today's episode, Mr. Puneet Katyal. He is the Chief Executive Officer of Viviid Emissions Reductions Universal Private Limited. He is here to share his valuable insights on the evolution and the importance of carbon markets as a possible solution to mitigate climate change. A very warm welcome to you, Mr. Katyal.
Thanks, Ruchika, for a generous intro, and of course, a very well thought out intro on the subject of the larger issue at hand, which is climate change and how carbon markets can play a pivotal role in mitigating this particular crisis which the human race is facing. So yes, definitely.
Thank you so much, sir. And also we have with us Mr. Abhishek Jha. He is the senior correspondent for foreign affairs at CNN News 18, and he had also attended the G20 Bali Summit, which also deliberated upon the sustainable energy transition. So a very warm welcome to you, Abhishek. And Abhishek is going to assist me with some pertinent questions on the topic. And just to inform our viewers, I would like to say that Viviid Emission Reductions Universal Private Limited is in fact managing and optimizing a myriad of carbon portfolios and projects that range from wind, solar, hydroelectric, and many more such renewable energy projects. So my first question to you, Mr. Katyal, is what is your organization's goal and vision as a credible climate change mitigator? And what are the services and guidance that your organization provides and offers towards managing carbon portfolios of your clients?
So Ruchika, let me start with what most of the corporates are doing in this particular domain as far as mitigation of climate change through interventions in carbon markets is concerned.
Mm-hmm.
Most of the large organizations, they are which are in the segment of clean energy generation or clean energy distribution, or even having captive generation facilities in the form of solar and wind plants. I wouldn't say all of them, but a large segment of this particular corporate category, they are having a little myopic view of this whole ambit of carbon markets, because they have been trying to register their projects under various mechanisms which are like CDM, which is regulated by UNFCCC and Gold Standard and Vera, etc.
Right.
But what is probably lacking in this whole approach is a holistic view of this whole universe of carbon segment and climate change mitigation, which we normally term as P-cube strategy, which is planet, people, and profitability.
Okay.
So the third segment, of course, for any corporate is important. Carbon markets provide incentivized solutions to these corporates for installing these clean energy plants. But then at the same time, what is lacking in this whole strategy is to take people and planet along with them.
Right.
So when I say people, they are having a separate CSR cell, which is having an isolated, compartmentalized approach, which is not linked to their overall carbon strategy, which is lacking here, and
Right.
hence the synergy of the CSR strategy and carbon strategy is missing somewhere. And number two is that climate change mitigation is not only about carbon markets. It
Right.
also involves a larger vision in terms of mitigation and adaptation. And the CSR strategy has to become a tool for this mitigation and adaptation approach,
Right. Right.
which is probably not the case with the corporates at this point of time, especially in Indian context. So that is what needs to change. It has changed in a large number of developed economies like US and European countries, but in India, it is still evolving. So this synergy between planet, people, and profitability is something which is not present right now. And this is what we are trying to do within Vivid emissions reductions, wherein we take all these three P's along with us, so that there's a complete synergy in what we are doing.
Yeah.
So, Mr. Katyal, if I may ask something.
Yes, please.
So,
Sure,
Mr.
please.
Katyal, we have been hearing a lot about from the developed side of the world about this technology transfer and funding, which is like close to $100 billion, I believe. They had promised in the last COP. Last, I mean. But I believe there has not been that kind of delivery on the ground in terms of technological transfer or the funding. Both so, since you have been working with various stakeholders in this industry, so I would like to have some understanding, where is the roadblock? Where are they stuck? Do they don't like, or like, are they insecure about sharing technology with the developing countries? The funding, what they had promised, is it like they have overcommitted themselves about this whole issue that is of climate change? What is stopping them from funding, and what is stopping them from sharing the technologies that they have already been using for so many years?
Abhishek, the way I look at it is that the whole set of negotiations, as you rightly pointed out, this October,
Yes,
we had COP 27. 27 is a number in itself. This means that we are in 27th year of negotiation, which says a lot. And in these 27 years, negotiations have followed a very tardy pace, both in terms of technology transfer and also in terms of funding, as you rightly pointed out. And this whole dialogue of $100 billion fund, etc. This dialogue didn't start 2 years or 3 years back. It started when the Paris Agreement was actually agreed upon by major economies. So effectively, it has been 6-7 years since this dialogue has started. But on ground, this has not taken any shape so far, because not a single penny has been transferred so far. There has not been any fund which has been created, nor there has been any mechanism which has been evolved to facilitate this fund transfer. Similarly, at the level of technology transfer, the major roadblock is that the negotiations are not being governed by the technocrats. The negotiations are primarily being governed by political dispensations, and they hardly understand the importance of technology transfer. So tomorrow in US, if there is a ruling dispensation change, you would see that there's a whole change in policy, and the technology transfer, even if it is happening to some extent, that would also stop. So the major roadblock in terms of funding is that there's probably a lack of will, and there's a lack of sense of urgency in terms of the crisis which human race is facing. In terms of funding, the major roadblock is that entire dialogue is being mandated primarily by the political dispensations rather than the technocrats who understand the importance of this technology transfer in order to mitigate the whole, phenomena of climate change. So these are the two roadblocks which I primarily see in terms of funding transfer as well as technology transfer. Of course, there are many other nuances to it, but then these are the two major factors which I see, because I have been attending primarily almost all the COPs, and this is what I have been observing.
Also, my another question is regarding this whole renewable sector, renewable energy sector that we are trying to talk about, that will help us reduce a lot of emission, because that way our dependability on coal and other fossil fuel will reduce, and consequently this I mean electronic or battery based energy platforms will take over. My question is regarding this whole manufacturing ecosystem that has been operating in the last 2 decades at least. Mostly that is part of this China's manufacturing industry. Now this whole geopolitics things keep changing and the policies keep changing. We have recently had this COVID and lockdown and delivery restrictions. Obviously, India and China have strategic differences also. So in that context, China being one major factory, and China, so I'm sure there is a cost effectiveness why China is the manufacturing hub, and unless until that cost effectiveness is uh, you know that transfers across the world, the production will not take off the way it should. India is also doing, like, there has been a lot of policy changes on the ground. Production link incentives have been announced by the government side. So from the again from the industry side, what is the thing that can actually expedite this whole ecosystem that we can create back in India, and our dependability on China or other world should decrease in that way?
See, first of all, again, the whole discussion about emission intensity has to be understood in its proper context. So when we say that India's emissions are very high, it's probably the third largest emitter in the world, it is factually correct, and it is factually incorrect in a way also. And correct, why? Because the cumulative emissions are very high, just because of the fact that the population in India is huge, and that is why the cumulative emissions are too large. We are a population of 130 crore people, and hence the cumulative emissions are large. But it is also incorrect in the sense that the per capita emissions in India are still very low. You would be surprised to know that the per capita carbon dioxide emission in India is almost 1/20th as compared to that of US or European economies or developed economies. So the carbon dioxide which any particular individual in India is emitting is not even 1/20th. In some cases, it is 1/25th, 1/26th as compared to countries like Switzerland, Finland, etc., wherein the quality of life and the kind of electricity consumption per person they are having is much bigger as compared to India. And hence, this whole discussion about emission intensity has to be taken in its proper context. That is number one. Number two, our dependability or our reliance on China, etc., this discussion has been going on for a while. However, again, if you see the energy intensity in China per unit production of, say, any major commodity, whether it is steel or fertilizer or cement, etc., is higher as compared to India. The thing is that their manufacturing base is too big. So again, things have to be taken in context of per capita emissions, number one, and also in terms of manufacturing per capita emission intensity or per capita energy consumption. So India is far better as compared to China in terms of per capita energy consumption, and also in terms of industrial base per capita or per unit, say per ton of cement produced, per ton of steel produced, etc. And hence, I would say that China is probably not the best teacher for us to look at. And so the developed economies.
So the way you have explained it, just for the understanding, does that mean that if we produce the same stuff that we import from China, then we will have less carbon footprint on the same product that now we are producing in India?
No, I'm not saying that. In fact, the cement industry in India or steel industry in India or the fertilizer industry in India is much more energy efficient as compared to the similar industries in China. And that is why I'm saying that China is probably not the best case study for us.
Okay.
So we have to probably skip one step. China has evolved in its journey through the manufacturing in order to become a manufacturing giant by going through a very polluting route, which we don't want to do. So we directly want to skip the coal route. We want to go ahead from a route of coal-based energy consumption or gas-based energy consumption directly to clean energy consumption.
Right.
Without going through this whole journey of 20, 30 years, which China has gone through. So that is why our case study would be these developed economies, probably US, probably Germany, probably countries in the Europe, who have to some extent skipped this step. They have, of course, gone through this coal journey, but not as intense as China has gone through over the past 30, 40 years. I mean, since 70s, if you see the coal consumption in China, it has increased by almost 20, 30 times, not only in terms of cumulative consumption, but also in terms of per unit production of major commodities, whether it is cement, steel, fertilizer, or any other sector. So that is why we need to look at more energy efficient measures, and government of India is doing its best to do that. And that is why if you look at the measures which have been taken, which have been partially successful, I would say, the PAT scheme or the IREX scheme or the envisaged domestic carbon market, which India is planning to launch next year, etc. So these are the steps to incentivize industries to become more energy efficient and skip that step or journey of 20, 30 years and directly transition themselves to a clean energy mode. So, I'm sure you would be aware of the domestic energy or the domestic carbon market, which India is envisaging, which for which the pilot phase is expected to be launched in July in Gujarat. And 9 energy intensive sectors are supposed to be covered in that. And that's a major leap in moving towards a clean energy economy.
This whole carbon market, if you could just elaborate a little bit on that for our viewers' understanding, because how does it operate? Like, if I produce something which is like less energy efficient, but then I transfer it to others' account, how does this whole carbon marketing thing operates, and like how can Indian industries work around it to
See,
make themselves more efficient?
to some extent, it is true. It is just like I would say passing the buck, but that's the fact of the matter, and
I mean,
that
this
is
is what
something.
West has been doing for so many years, sending their production house back in China.
Yeah, so that's a fact, and probably to some extent that's one measure which is inevitable. Now, I would revert back to the same logic. If you see the carbon intensity or per capita emission in developed economies is much, much higher as compared to countries like India, Bangladesh, Malaysia, Indonesia, etc. And the fact of the matter remains, if you see now in US, I was in US for the past 3 weeks. In each household, there are four SUVs.
Yes, of course.
So, and they don't care about the energy consumption because energy is not a major expenditure as far as their total household expenditure is concerned. And that is why it is probably practically not possible for us to expect that each person in US will change his or her lifestyle overnight. And that's why, to expect that the emission intensity in developed economies would immediately come down say immediately when I say I'm talking of a time period of 5 years in carbon parlance, because immediate in carbon parlance is normally considered 4 to 5 years.
Mhm.
It is not a practical solution. And so they can do that probably over a period of 20, 30 years, right? And so if we have to look at a short-term solution, the short-term and most cost-effective solution is to resort to carbon markets. Why? Because commissioning a clean energy project in a country like India or say China or Bangladesh, Malaysia, etc., is much more cost effective as compared to commissioning a project in Germany or Finland or Iceland, number one. Number two, the energy demands in country, cumulative, again, I'm talking of cumulative energy demand. Cumulative energy demand in countries like India and China is way ahead of countries, smaller economies in Europe like Germany, or smaller economies in terms of their population base, like Germany, again, Finland and Switzerland, all these countries. And that is why, if we install a clean energy project here, and richer countries like Britain, Switzerland, etc., they can incentivize these clean energy projects through purchase of carbon offsets. That is probably at this point of time the most cost effective way of mitigating climate change. It may not be the most cost effective way in the long run. Long run means I'm talking of a horizon of 30, 40 years.
Yeah,
Because
when we
in
have.
over a horizon of 30, 40 years, the most cost effective way for them would be to reduce their own carbon footprint. To understand that climate change is not impacting India, the climate change is not impacting only China, Bangladesh, Maldives, etc. Climate change is also going to impact them eventually. They don't understand that right now. But at this point of time, the most cost effective way is to resort to carbon markets. And so basically, what this whole mechanism means is that these countries purchase carbon offsets from clean energy developers in countries like India, China, Bangladesh, etc., so that the clean energy projects in these countries are incentivized, and hence the developers, the industries, the steel producers, the cement producers are encouraged to either install captive plants, captive clean energy plants for themselves, or to feed to the grid. So at this point of time, this is the most cost effective way. And again, there are two elements to it. One is the compliance market, wherein, as part of the erstwhile Kyoto Protocol, these countries had committed certain, targets to meet in order to reduce their emissions. So Kyoto Protocol has expired now, which is supposed to be succeeded by Paris Agreement. Again, Paris Agreement, there are many roadblocks. It has not been operationalized fully yet, but eventually once it is operationalized, so there would be a compliance segment of the market wherein these countries, not only the developed economies but also the developing economies like India, etc., they would have to meet certain emission reduction targets. And then the second segment of this market is the voluntary segment, which is driven primarily by the corporates, large corporates like Amazon, Walmart, maybe Indian PSUs like Steel Authority of India Limited, NTPC, etc. Because as part of their overall PR strategy, or as part of their overall, I would say, emission reduction strategy, they have given net zero targets. They have given net zero targets to be achieved either by 2030 or by 2040 or by 2050, depending upon their emission intensity at this point of time. So that would be the major driver of the carbon markets moving forward. And it is expected that voluntary market is going to form probably 60 to 70% of the whole carbon market segment, not only in terms of monetary value, but also in terms of volume. So this is the broad outline of the carbon market. So one is the compliance segment, second is the voluntary segment. Moving forward, voluntary and compliance, this compartmentalization would get blurred to some extent, but then primarily the markets are going to be driven by the voluntary segment.
As you rightly said, many Indian large Indian corporations are aiming at net zero and incorporating climate action initiatives in their business imperatives, and especially the CSR, with a focus on sustainability hinged on renewable energy. So, how can CSR interventions speed up the efforts of developing a robust, clean economy? And also, I want to know for the understanding of our viewers, what exactly are carbon markets and how well will they work in the Indian context?
So again, as far as CSR is concerned, as I mentioned earlier, uh, right now, CSR is being seen in Indian context by most of the corporates in terms of legislation. As
Right,
you might be aware, there's Companies Act in place because of which the CSR expenditure, which
right.
is 2% of PAT,
Hmm.
has to be spent on
Yes, sir.
CSR interventions, right?
Yes.
But then they look at CSR interventions only from that lens, only from that perspective. Now, again, if they synergize that with their overall carbon mitigation strategy,
Mm-hmm.
their carbon footprint will get reduced much more faster,
Hmm.
much more efficiently,
Hmm.
and in a much more cost effective manner.
Hmm. Hmm.
Because if you take people along, for example, I'll give you an example of cook stoves.
Hmm.
Now, in most of the rural households in India, they are using these wood-based chulhas, right?
Hmm. Hmm.
Which are very polluting, so causing massive health damage to the women who are actually indulged in cooking practices in India primarily. So, if you replace those wood-based chulhas with more energy-efficient chulhas,
Hmm.
which are designed in a fashion wherein the fuel consumption is much lesser and
Right.
the smoke is much lesser.
Right.
So it forms a part of your CSR strategy,
Hmm.
and it can also be a carbon mitigation project.
Right.
So this is a very appropriate example of synergizing carbon mitigation strategy and CSR strategy,
Hmm. Hmm.
which is lacking as far as Indian context is concerned. Of course, many corporates are now doing that,
Hmm.
but still the level of penetration is very less. And again, in terms of the role the domestic carbon markets can play,
Hmm.
they can play a major role. Why? Because you might have seen that in India, REC scheme, renewable energy certificate scheme, or the PAC scheme, which is based on energy efficiency measures, have been partially successful. Now, they have been partially successful because of the fact that, you know, India was new
Hmm.
in terms of adopting these strategies. But now Indian government has learned from the mistakes, and hence the domestic carbon markets will be much more robust, much more watertight, and hence the loopholes which have been there in REC scheme or PAT scheme will be plugged, and they can play a pivotal role in transition towards a more clean, energy efficient economy.
Okay, sir. So, sir, what is your business model? And I want you to elaborate on the kind of guidance and the services that you are providing to your clients, and who are developers of clean energy projects. So, and to your end buyers, of course, who procure carbon credits from your organization. So, could you please explain your business model?
See, our business model is simple, Ruchika. Basically, carbon markets, I'm not sure whether you are aware or not, have earned a little bad name because of the fact that some of the players in this segment have tried to utilize the loopholes which have
Hmm.
been there in the market, and because of that, the level of credibility of the offsets
Hmm.
which the global buyers look at or which the global buyers want
Right.
has been missing.
Yes.
So we are simply trying to plug that gap. So we make sure that the offsets which we generate
Hmm.
go through as rigorous process as possible. And most of the projects which are registered by us under CDM, they are also registered under gold standard. So what does that mean? That means that those projects are not only leading to emission reductions, but they are also leading to benefits for the population or the populace which is residing in the vicinity of those projects.
Right.
So that is the simple business model which we follow, wherein we focus only on the integrity of the offsets which we are generating. And to that extent, I would also like to highlight the fact that we have a very strong lineage in this sector. Way back, I would say 20 years back, when most of the organization, even the prestigious ones, I don't want to name any organization, but when most of the so-called, bigger consulting organizations didn't even hear the name carbon, we had a carbon division in place. And that point of time, we got the first project, bundled project in India registered under CDM. We were the first one to cross the 1,000 megawatt threshold of registered capacity under CDM. We have had no rejection of projects so far. And the combination of these factors makes us unique in terms of delivery to our customers, in terms of having impeccable track record and offsets which are real, which are permanent, which are accountable, and which are transparent. So that is the simple business model we follow. I mean, there's nothing more and nothing less about it. Yeah.
And could you please expand on the strategy further when you are selecting the projects? What qualities do you scout for in your project developers?
So there are 5, 6 main criteria which are important for the projects to adhere to. The first one is additionality. I don't know, additionality is a very technical term, but basically it means that any project, whether it is renewable energy project or any other kind of clean energy project or energy efficiency project, it needs to be additional in the sense that it should require external financial support to make it sustainable. So the IRR or the return on equity for that particular project should be lesser than a certain benchmark. So it should require that extra carbon support to make it financially viable. So that is the first and foremost criteria. The second criteria is permanence. It should be having, so as you might be aware, the wind energy projects or the solar energy projects, which we normally commission, they are having a lifespan of around 30 years. Right. So that is like permanence of emission reductions. We are not talking only of a horizon of 2 or 3 years. We are talking of a horizon of 30 years. Then there is whole gambit of MRVs, monitoring and reporting protocol. So the emission reductions which you are undertaking, they should be transparent. They should be accountable. Anybody should be in a position to verify that. And last but not the least is that you should be having, again, the same principle of P cube, wherein you take planet, people, and profitability in a synergized manner and not look at the projects in isolation. Because if you look at these projects in isolation, they are never going to be successful in terms of carbon mitigation and adaptation. So these are the 4 or 5 criteria which we look at as far as selection of projects is concerned. And that's the reason I again come back to the point. We've had an impeccable track record. There's no organization in the world which is having a sizable carbon portfolio without a single project rejected under UNFCCC. So there have been so many rejections, but we have not had, fortunately, a single rejection by UNFCCC.
That's commendable. So what is the USP that sets you apart from your other competitors?
So again, the adherence to all these 5 criteria which I just mentioned, and we make sure that our system is completely technology driven. It is not based on whims and fancies of any individual. So tomorrow, if Puneet Katyal is not around, so the system should be such that it should be in a position to adhere to these factors in an automatic manner. And hence we are having the best ERP system in place. We are having the best technology in place to make sure that all these factors are inculcated in the DNA of the organization and are not again influenced by individual whims and fancies. So this is what sets us apart from other organizations.
What is the technologies and dimensions for the
Some
climate?
disturbance on your part, Ruchika, I guess.
I'm asking what are the emerging technologies and dimensions particularly exciting for the climate change mitigation domain?
Yeah, so basically, so far the focus as far as climate change mitigation is concerned has been only on renewable energy sector. But then, I mean, we need to understand and appreciate that carbon dioxide is just one of the gases or one of the factors which is leading to climate change. So, there are six other gases which are actually responsible for this phenomenon of climate change, and they are much more potent than carbon dioxide. A gas like sulfur hexafluoride is 21 times more potent as compared to carbon dioxide in terms of carbon intensity. So the focus so far has been only on carbon dioxide, and that needs to also change. It has to be a much more broader approach, because in Indian context, wherein 70% of the people are still dependent on agriculture as a
Yes,
source of their livelihood.
yes.
The land management, the crop management, animal husbandry, which is a major source of methane.
Mm.
Unless and until we address these points, and unless and until we look at these areas from a perspective of climate change mitigation, the measures which have been taken so far will remain half cooked and half baked, because so far we have been only looking at carbon dioxide, and
Yeah.
hence now we need to broaden this context and broaden our horizon.
And how do we include agriculture, since India is also primarily an agrarian economy? Most of the population depends on that. So how do we bring agriculture into the carbon market scheme?
Again, not only in terms of policy, but also in terms of the actions by the corporates.
Yeah.
If they merge, because see, if you see, um, in terms of the CSR expenditure also, uh, I'm not sure whether you had a look at this statistics, but 60% of the amount which has been spent on an average by large corporates in the past 3 years has been spent on various measures which are directly or indirectly related to agriculture sector.
Yes, yes.
But where has been the gap? The gap has been that CSR is being looked upon as a separate
Entity.
component within corporates, and carbon mitigation is being looked upon as a separate strategy. And
Yes.
if we synergize and merge these two strategies, of course, that would go a long way in terms of mitigation, in terms of the emissions which are released by the agriculture sector. Just for your information, in agriculture sector, the major source of, I would say, the emission releasing gases is methane, because the animal husbandry sector is a major source of emissions of methane. And if we are in a position to efficiently manage that, that can be taken care of to an extent of 50%, which would be a huge step towards mitigating climate change.
And at the level of government policies, what changes would you want to see or recommend that will, expedite the efforts? Because we have a lot of laws in place, but then we have pollution control boards in states who are not so efficient, and they don't have the technical know-how and the monitoring capacity to ensure a well-functioning market. So, what is required right now? What is the need of the hour, according to you?
See, we have been dealing with a number of state pollution boards. We have been dealing with CPCB also, Central Pollution Control Board.
Right.
Our personal experience has been that there is no lack of knowledge.
Okay.
There has not been a lack of know-how. What is lacking is that the simple focus is on outsourcing. The simple focus is to outsource any particular intervention to one of the big fours or one of the large consulting organizations. Rather than that, the focus has to be more on capacity building.
Yes.
So if they have a strong and robust knowledge base, but then if they bridge the gap between what they already know and what is the new technology which has evolved in the past 4 or 5 years, then they would be at the same platform as any of the large consulting organizations, which has been lacking. So the focus has been on outsourcing rather than capacity building. And hence this focus needs to shift from pure outsourcing to capacity building. The second aspect is that, again, most of these government agencies, they are driven by human, of course, there has to be a human intervention in everything, what we endeavor or what we do. But then the technological aspect is missing. So they don't have the ERP systems in place. They don't have the best technologies in place. They don't have the foolproof watertight technologies in place to make sure that the monitoring and the verification is something which is driven by technology and not again by human whims and fancies. So two pillars. One is capacity building, and second is to make these organizations completely technology driven, is what I see as two major factors which can go a long way in making these government organizations self-driven and ready for the future.
Right. So Abhishek, you had some questions for Mr. Katyal?
So I was just, my last question would be that you talked about planet, people, and profitability. And if a company which is investing in this whole carbon emission thing, they don't get due profit, how would they come forward and invest in that? So what are the steps that you could ask the company that going through a less carbon emission model could actually be long-term beneficiary for them? Because initially, for a very short term, it looks a lot of investment, experts have to be roped in, and it's quite discouraging. So how do you pitch that idea that, okay, so in long term, your business is actually going to benefit a lot from this?
See, Abhishek, the way we look at it is to focus on the value proposition. And when I say value proposition, we don't see carbon offset just as a vanilla or a plain carbon offset. So if you merge carbon offset story with a very strong CSR story, when I say story, not only a story, but actually action on the ground, then the buyers are willing to pay the price. Just to give you an example, a vanilla CER carbon offset, which can probably fetch maybe $2 in the present market. If I merge my strong and robust CSR action along with that carbon offset, I can fetch as high as $9 in the market. And that is where the importance of value proposition comes in. So you have to merge your social and co-benefit story. Again, I'm repeating, story doesn't mean story in itself. I'm just putting it in context. Story means actual action on ground. If you merge the actual action on the ground in terms of the social benefits along with your carbon mitigation strategy, you won't believe that there have been forward contracts in place. I don't again want to name any organization either in terms of sellers or in terms of buyers, which are having forward contracts for the next 10 years at a price of $15.
Okay, that's huge.
Whereas, a vanilla carbon offset at this point of time might fetch only $2 in the open market. So you can appreciate the kind of differential the value proposition can bring about. And that is what we pitch to the potential developers or the potential investors, that if they really look at the long-term horizon and if they want to really make some change on the ground in terms not only of the carbon mitigation, but also in terms of the co-benefits, in terms of CSR, in terms of working with the communities, then yes, profitability will come. It may come after 2 years, it may come after three years, but it will come. They just have to look at a long-term, broader horizon rather than just having a myopic vision of generating revenue or generating profit right from the first year itself, which is not possible in present context.
So one last question that I had for you, which is very important, the soon to be launched national carbon market. What, according to you, is the road ahead for our country, for our economy?
Yeah, I think it's a long haul because I've had discussions with many stakeholders in the Indian, I would say, power corridors, and I think the whole thought process is still in a very nascent stage.
Mm-hmm.
So for the whole thing to actually crystallize and take the shape of a very well regulated, robust market probably would be 3 to 4 years away. But yes, it's a step in the right direction. It's a step wherein, at least the process has been started with the right intent. The only challenge which remains in front of us is to learn from the mistakes, not only of the global carbon markets, but also from the domestic schemes, so that we are in a position to plug those loopholes and come out with a robust platform by 2025, which is going to be the next benchmark in terms of announcing the amended targets by various economies. So hopefully by 2025 we should be having a well functioning, well oiled machinery of this whole gambit of domestic markets, whether it is REC or PAT scheme or domestic carbon markets. And of course, one important aspect would be the fungibility and the linkages between these three mechanisms, because REC is one mechanism, PAT is another mechanism. Now, if we add another mechanism, domestic carbon market, and there's no linkages between these three markets, then again it will not yield any result. So the fungibility and the strong interlinkages and the synergy between various mechanisms and various platforms is something which is going to be very important.
Great. Thank you so much, sir. That was indeed very, very engaging and very insightful. And I have learned so much from you. I believe if us CSR stakeholders, especially if they're listening to your interview, they'll learn some very important points of, should not be working in silos and should be, putting together, climate change as part of their entire working. So thank you, sir, once again for giving us this opportunity and taking out time from your busy schedule. Thanks a
It
lot.
has been a pleasure, Ruchika. It has been a pleasure talking to you, and thanks Abhishek as well for very insightful questions. Thanks Kuhu for providing all the technical support.
Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you. Thank you.